designers. You asked me to do a short video about the animation stuff and rendering, so here it goes. Alright, so first what we've done in the lecture is we've created several special effects. So you asked me to do the lightning, so here we go. So that's my first ball, move it to the left, then I duplicate it, move it to the right. Because I do this because lightning always has to go between two different points, right? So in my case it's the balls, you can choose whatever, and then you can just hide those balls in the final render. But you choose your effects menu, and then you go effects and lightning, boom. So that basically generates the lightning between the two things, and if you go here in the animation, you can see how it essentially does the different stuff. All right, so I'm going to zoom it in here. And if I render this, you have to render this not with the Arnold render, but my software render. If you render it with anything else, let me just show you. If I render this with a hardware renderer, all I'll see is the mesh eventually of the lightning. But if I change it to software render and render it, you get the lightning that you wanted. All right. So that's the lightning. And then let's do one more thing, which is the physics ball. All right, so let me just undo this, and I need to do the polygon primitives and interactive creation on, and I'm gonna create a bottom part of the of this is like my ground from where the ball will bounce, and then I'll create a new ball, which is here, and then just drag it up to make sure that it's where I want it. Okay, so it's in the center and top, perfect. Okay. I'm gonna go back here. I'm gonna turn on my gate so I see what I'm actually rendering, so I can go to zoom in a bit closer. Now, for physics, if I would now play this, like nothing happens, right? Because I haven't added any physical properties. Now, in physics, again, in your FX, you have your field solvers. You have two different things: active rigid bodies and passive rigid bodies. Active rigid bodies are those that move, they interact with other objects, and they're basically affected by physics in this way. Passive rigid bodies interact with physical objects, but they don't move, they are passive. So these are things like walls and so on, right? So long story short, basically my ball becomes a active rigid body because it's something that's, that interacts, and my ground becomes a passive rigid body, right? And if I play this, still nothing happens. And that's because physics, okay, they are physical objects, but they still are not controlled by any physical environment. And in our case, we need gravity. So I'll select the ball, and I do field and solvers, and I add a gravity here, right? Field solvers, gravity. So I got my gravity field here. So now, when I play this, you can see that the ball now goes in. So if I play this, it goes down, right? My play is too fast, and that's because I go to my animation settings, and in the time slider, I go from play every frame to 24 frames per second. Okay, so my animation actually runs 24 frames per second instead of as fast as my graphics card can go. All right, so if I play this, it's pretty good, right? So I get my ball, and there we go. What I can do a little bit, so I go back to my sphere, and I go to attribute editor. And in the rigid body, I make it a bit more bouncy. So let's go all the way to 1 point something. Okay, so if I play this, that's about right. Okay, so boom, and then my ball bounces nicely. All right, so you can play with all of that as much as you want. But let's now actually render this. All right, so I'm going to position a little bit to the center and a bit bigger. There we go. So that's kind of what I like. So now, when we render this as a single frame. All right, that's not what we want. What we want is we want to render the whole sequence. Before we continue, we're going to do one more thing, and that is in the render, we're going to hide this plane. Okay, so like I said, we're actually going to hide all of these things. All right, so I'm going to go to my ball, and I'm going to go to sphere shape, and I'm going to find the render stats. Okay, so it has to be the shape, render stat, and we turn off the primary visibility. Same thing here, turn off primary visibility. P-plane shape, primary visibility. So when we render this now, we actually get just the lightning, the ball, and the ground is missing, right? So it's still going to interact with everything that we want, right? So it's still going to do what we want, boom, 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 and jump. But
it's not going to render. Right? So it's going to look a bit nicer. All right, we're almost ready to do the rendering. But before I do that, I really want to save my scene. So in this case, let's just create a new project here so that I am okay with everything. So I'm going to just name this rendering, accept, and I'm going to save my scene. And I will save this in the rendering scenes, and I'm going to name this default. Okay, save as. Exciting times. We're ready to render the scene. Okay, so what we want is to open the render settings. And this is going to vary to what I showed you in class, because I told you to render things into AVI format. It essentially is already an animation, but that comes with its own problems. For example, if you render it into a movie and your computer crashes halfway through or something, you're gonna lose the whole rendering process and you are not in control, right? So what is normally done in the animation rendering work is that you render individual sequence of images and then you package them into the movie, right? So that's the part that I'm going to show you. And I might show you actually, I'll show you also the AVI path just where it is for your convenience so you don't get confused, but I will continue with the image sequence. The other reason for this is as well that many of you are using Macs, and on Mac, the AVI option is not even available, and the QuickTime option is very wonky and just doesn't work. At least doesn't work for me almost never. So, render settings. First, the most important thing is to choose your render. In this case, we are going to use my software. The next bit is how do we want to name the file. So let's call it my movie. Let's call it bouncy ball. Bouncy ball. Now, what is the image format? There are only two movie formats here. On Mac, it would be MOV. On Windows, it would be AVI. So if you are not worried about crashing anything, you can do that. On Mac, I do not advise you to use MOV format. It's like, for me, it just doesn't produce anything, right? Instead, what we want is to produce PNG files because they are not compressed and you're going to get very nice output. Or you can go directly to JPEG for some compression. But for me, the best way forward is usually PNG. The next part is to choose the naming of your file, right? So how it is. So if it's just a single frame, it's usually the name of the file. So it will be bouncyball.png if you select this. But I'm going to render multiple frames. So I think the best way forward is to go with a name.number of the frame.extension. And actually here you see how it is going to be named, right? So in this case, it's going to be stored in my images folder, rendering images, and the first file is going to be bouncyball.001.png, and the last file is going to be bouncyball0020. Where is the 20 coming from? You probably have a 10 here. It is because you choose what is your first and the last frame, so that's what you should be selecting. In my case, I want to render the first 100 frames, and you see it's going from 001 to 0100. If you chose AVI, you will probably see just bouncyball.avi. Next part is you have to choose what you are actually rendering. So in my case, it would be my perspective camera. If you have other cameras in your scene, choose those. Then the size of your output animation. For preview, just go with the standard definition, which is, I don't know what's called HD, it's actually SD, 540. But for the final output, please do render it full HD, so it would be HD 1080. I'm gonna go halfway in between, so HD 720. So this is my resolution. This is my also the resolution parameter. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do aliasing. I'm going to put to medium quality here. So these are the parameters of Maya render, right? Again, you can play with your samples and everything if you want to. I'm going to leave the default. Quick recap. I check where my files are saved up in here. I chose the PNG format. You can choose AVI. That's going to package everything into a single file. If you do choose something like that, so it would be here MOV, you have a compression button here. Make sure you choose uncompressed frames. But I advise you just go along with me and choose the PNG files.
then how many frames we're rendering, the perspective camera, the resolution, and we are done here. Okay. So we're going to choose here the rendering menu. So going from here to rendering. So if you have FX, make sure it's rendering. And up here in render, you have a render sequence and batch render. Please export the render sequence on your own. That renders everything within your current window, and you can export the output. The batch render actually launches an external process and renders like in the background. So if you hit this button, you can have these options here. Batch render and close, batch render, pretty simple, right? So if I hit batch render and close, it actually launches an external program on your hard drive, which is called the batch render, and you can monitor its progress from here. So in this case, it's telling you it's rendering with Maya software. On my Maya, it's actually not telling me which frame is rendered here. That's a bit unfortunate, but you can actually spy on it if you go to a location of your project. So in my case, that would be Documents, Maya, Projects, Rendering, and Images. And look at that. I get my bouncy ball images already being populated. Right? So this is my bouncy ball frame number 1, 2, 3, 4, and look at this. It's going down. I can already see the individual frames. And I'm going to wait until the last frame basically appears here. All right, and just like that, we're done. As I mentioned, if the process would crash at any moment, you can always easily recuperate any of these frames, so you don't need to re-render, right? So it's much safer, and you can actually check individual frames, how they are. This looks a bit weird because it actually is using alpha channel, so it's actually black, but because this is I export transparent PNG, it looks like this, all right? So what we're going to do next is we need to now package this sequence of frames into a movie. Now, on Mac, this is super simple, which you will be using QuickTime. And I believe if you use QuickTime also on Windows, so if you install QuickTime Player on Windows, you can do it easily. On Windows, there is actually a default application from Maya called FCheck. And I'll post a link to a video tutorial on YouTube of how you can use FCheck to package those images into a movie. But like I said, you can just install QuickTime and follow along with me as well, or just on Windows use FCheck. Mac unfortunately doesn't have FCheck anymore. So what I'll do is I launch my QuickTime player. So I'm gonna go here and launch QuickTime. And what I'll do is, you don't see the top menu, but there is a file, and I do open image sequence. And in the open image sequence, I go to my documents folder, Maya, projects, rendering, images, and then I'll select all of those images and click on choose media. And it asks me, like, what do I want? So do I want to keep the resolution? Yes. I don't want to resize it. What's the speed? I was exporting as 20 frames per second, and it actually already encodes this into H.264 packager, right? So it's actually going to be a decent size. So I do open, it prepares the video, and then boom, our movie is done. And look at that. All right, I get my ball bouncing through the electric storm. As I mentioned, on Windows, you just have to use FCheck, but it's exactly the same process. You load the image sequence, hit the button, and the whole thing is created into a movie. All right, guys, if you, okay, in my case, and then, okay, also on Mac, you can actually hit and save. So I'll name this bouncy ball, save. So I go to my downloads folder, and there's my bouncy ball and movie. It's 1 megabyte, so it's actually pretty decent. Sorry, file open. This is my bouncy ball, right? And done. All right, guys, if you have any questions, just post them on the forum, and have fun with this. Thank you. Bye-bye.